Thank you. All right. So again, we'll put up a summary of what we tried to capture in terms of the discussion. I would again emphasize we're not trying to repeat all the things that were presented, because we have that, but to make sure we capture. It's not on? Is that better? Do I need help? Probably I need a lot of help, but leave it on? Okay. Is that better? All right. Okay, so we're trying to capture your comments, so I want to make sure if you told us something that we didn't write down here, either it's because we didn't think it was important or I forgot it, so probably more that I missed it. So speak up and let me know. Can you get me to the full screen? Okay, so standard deviation models. One of the comments was if we're applying single station sigma and we're using geotechnical modeling of just the shallow part of the site, that the site term is going to be partially included down, effects down below that geotechnical layer. And so we need to realize that we're only capturing part of the site term with the shallow part and increase our uncertainty in the bedrock layer ground motion, take count, and that this is probably a period-dependent feature as well. The form of the ground motion distribution, so the standard approach assumes everything's log normal in ground motion. In the highly nonlinear cases are long periods, as Tom has pointed out to us before. He says this could be very different. In particular, this might be a bigger issue when we're going all the way down, reducing the standard deviations to the phi ESSs, or in particular the single path phis. Because now, so we're getting a narrower distribution. If things are popping out, we won't be catching them in our tails, that we would be picking up in our really broad ergodic values. As well, we can look again at the slips and ground motions from the finite fault rupture generators to see if they are indicating anything different than log normal, or if we can check a different distribution. For single station or sigma models as well, consider the data collection that's needed if we're going to try to apply this in a longer time frame. So what kind of station coverage is needed to be able to support the use of this data in the future. The increase of the short distance phi for small magnitudes was we had a long discussion on that, trying to understand what's causing it. The suggestion being that what we looked at, radiation pattern wasn't really the cause, not a full cause of the explanation, that it could be related to the uncertainty in the hypocentral depth, and that's in fact. And so we can do some testing to see if that's the case. Estimating the single path phi, instead of using or projecting this back to a closeness index near 0 or 0.01, use a value instead near 0.05, or that is near the smallest data point in there, so that we're not extrapolating a form, but we're sticking to where we have data constraining it. Effective spatial correlation, what Jack showed was there is a correlation structure in the data. Spatial correlation, that's generally ignored when we're deriving the ground motion models, leading to a bias towards a small phi, and so we would get the correction from that using NGA West 2 with site terms, so that we can see the size of that correction and simply scale the phi by that amount. The bump at 10 hertz, so we talked about that yesterday and again today. It's seen at the surface, but not in the borehole station. So Christine has looked at this, and Adrian have both shown that they see this as consistent in the 10 downhole data is a real reduction in this bump. So that really indicates it's a site term. And if it's mapped into tau, then we're suffering from the correlations that we talked about yesterday. So interrupt me if I left out something on these topics. Sigma, yes. You need a microphone.
This might reflect my confusion on terminology, but The spatial correlation, is it phi SS or phi S2S that Jack showed the spatial correlation for? And am I understanding those correctly as being different?
Those are different. Phi SS is our single station phi. So after we correct the within event residuals for the systematic site terms, what's left, and we have a value. And let's say that number is 0.5. Okay? What Jack has shown is because we treated all those points as independent when they're truly correlated, maybe it should have been 0.52. Okay? Because you really should be using that value. If you remember, his curve went up. As stations become further separated, they are independent. But when we have closely spaced stations, even after we've taken out the site term and we've taken out the event term, there's still a correlation that's being ignored when we treat them as independent values. So, right, so that's what, so it is phi SS here. Phi S2S is really the size, the standard deviation of the site term variability, okay? So right now we've yanked that out. That other part is used when we want to estimate how well I can constrain the site effect. If I have 10 recordings, how well can I constrain it given the size of phi S2S, which tells me around the world, there's either a large standard deviation for the cases that Adrian showed. If it was on high topography, I think it was, it's even harder to get at. If it's on flat, then you need fewer recordings to be able to resolve that term. Okay? Yes?
I guess that correlation that Jack mentioned.
It's not working just yet.
Okay. So,
Just give it a little.
that correlation that Jack mentions also affects the estimation of tau, and I guess it doesn't affect the average tau, but may increase the uncertainty. If many of your stations are closely spaced and highly correlated.
Right. So that so
it
those
really
correlations.
creates- Yeah.
So we map those correlations into the event term partly
Right.
as well. Correct.
Okay.
So ideally, you run a likelihood model where that really tries to separate all of those pieces out using the correlation structure Jack talked about. Then you can pull those things out. So we probably would want to see impacts on phi SS as well as tau. Okay. So. All right, I'm out of my abilities here. All right, anything else on sigma? This is one that we know really matters to the hazard. Okay? Complex and splay ruptures. So I made my appeal to you, and I'll just repeat it here. We're going to have to make a decision on how to run GMPEs for complex and splay ruptures, and we have to stick something into them. So there's a lot of complications, and that includes rake for all sites and dip for hanging wall sites, that the GMPs need to have that information. So there's a whole lot of complications, but really I'm asking, can the finite fault simulations help inform us on what simplified approach do we use to go forward? So in complex ruptures, we're looking at the simulations. The comments were, one, consider a broader range of hypocenter locations, so that than was considered now. And also, we could be looking at dynamic ruptures to help guide parameterization of that secondary source rupture. Okay, positive. I didn't write anything else down, and I don't remember if anyone else had comments on different things we should be doing with the complex rupture case. Then there's a microphone right there.
Okay, so consider a broader range of hypocenter locations. Is that along strike or down dip or both? What do you mean there?
I think it's both, and part of these were, are they constrained to the top of the hypocenter or not, but I think we need to push them out a little bit more. Okay, yes.
you and your TI team have talked about this before, but you probably don't remember it. But there are 5 or 6 complex rupture earthquake in the NGA West database that has a kinematic source model. Can you use those models to do the forward calculation at a dense grid of sites and look at how?
Okay.
Well,
so-
could we use the same stations
He-
where we have records?
No, but beyond
Just
that,
mimic it.
go beyond where there are records and say, here's what the source looks like. Now let me do it finally so that we have enough, because our problem is we don't have enough recordings for it to be diagnostic. You could, the key was you got as good of a fit, what Carola showed you using, say, Cho and Young's model. Either way, it couldn't tell. Okay, so we need something different to be able to tell the difference. Okay? All right. What did I do? All right. Splay rupture, so continuing this theme, was back to normalizing the results in a meaningful way. So we probably have to normalize the finite fault simulations based on the spectral acceleration from the main rupture without the splay, so we have a fair point of comparison. And to do the same thing with the empirical values so that we can show the relative scaling from just the main rupture by itself to the main rupture plus the splay. The magnitude was an important part, whether it's done total or separate for the low frequencies. That was creating a larger difference. Hypocenters on the splay, so for restraining branch, consider a jumping of the hypocenter. So I think that's a case that we haven't captured yet. The rupture generator for the splay we had quite a bit of discussion on, and I think a conclusion of using the dynamic ruptures, again, to help guide the relative amount of slip that would be on display compared to the main rupture, and also checking geologic data constraints for that, and considering that we may start the rupture on display going to the main fault as opposed to just from the main slip onto display. The width of the rupture for large magnitudes, Katie talked about. It's something that's been discussed several times in the SCEC broadband group, and we need to send that back to them to come back with some recommendations on how that should be approached.
No, on that previous slide, and on the rupture generator, isn't another consideration you may need to think about is the taper, because you're tapering those ruptures at the end, and how they're being tapered in the display case might be another.
Correct. Yeah, and that's what we are getting at. Is it really looking like a separate earthquake
Right.
with the hypocenter and it begins, or does it come in as a whole front because it's seeing all of the rupture? So this
It's
one
part of that. Okay.
is just put it on there as well. We've been thinking about that, and
Tapers on the edge.
evolution of the rupture. Can I just write it like that? What do you want to call that?
It's also the terminus at the intersection.
Rupture tapering. Rupture tapering.
Thank you.
Because we can turn the taper off too, can't we?
We
Yeah.
talked about that.
Okay. All right.
So just to clarify, in September 26th, we talked about that and thinking of turning just the tapering off. It's not an issue.
Right.
Just specify 10%, but it just has to be all the boundaries at the same time. I think is a limitation.
Okay. Any other? We had a lot of discussion on this blade rupturing. Any other comments that I missed? Kappa. So for Diablo Canyon, a shortage of data that were currently in the peer database and Olga started with that, saying what can I see regionally around the Central Coast region that's in peer, and that's a smaller set. There is additional data that are earthquakes less well recorded is the way I decided to put it. So peer was trying to say, as long as we're going to bring in small magnitudes, let's just pick the really well recorded small magnitudes. But here we want to relax that to try to pull in more data in the Central Coast region. And that's all available already through the data centers, but we need to pull that out and go get that to appear. I'll show you there's about 10 earthquakes with more than 5 recordings within 50 kilometers of Diablo Canyon. So that's this picture that we had shown previously. These are earthquakes. This is that 50-kilometer circle around Diablo Canyon. This is a histogram of the number of broadband stations that would be picking those up. And if we need at least 5, which is here, we lose a lot of it. So there's a whole lot of recordings of earthquakes with just 1 or 2. That's not going to do it for us. But out here, there's about 10 of them where we can have enough recordings to be able to pull out an event term and start to use it as well.
When was that figure generated? What is the update date?
This was from workshop 1.
Is it possible that other earthquakes have occurred that have augmented the
Yeah, so we
list?
can check the whole thing,
Okay.
right? But this is the point, is there probably at least 10 and maybe a little bit more. But we need to relax the criteria that we've used previously for adding small magnitude events. For Palo Verde, the key really we have to correct the data for the site amplification. It's going to be hard to do much until that's done, so that's coming. The interpretation that Rob Cahan will do based on the SASW, we should encourage him to push it as deep as he can, as opposed to having someone else guess or make an interpretation with much less information available. So we'll see if he can capture as much of the full slope profile as possible.
None?
Yes.
Walt, this is Adrian. Walt is not here. He would tell you that if he was here. But you should push Rob to give you also uncertainties. Uncertainties both on the interpretation of the dispersion curve and uncertainties on the inversion.
Okay, and we have to finish the QA on the Arizona data processing. Okay.
Question, Norm. Yeah, Olga presented or talked about data from the TA array. Have you guys talked to the Arizona people, to Dave Bromba and Jerry Young? I don't see Dave today. He was here yesterday. About other records, perhaps with better bandwidths?
So we previously searched and didn't find something that was going
Yes,
to
probably we're talking to them.
Yeah, no, but I think I will check with that, but I'm pretty sure that Jenny isn't here, but we went through that as well. And I don't
Okay.
know, Melanie, do you know, was there any other data besides the TA array data that you guys found?
This is Melanie. So I think what Jenny pulled down was only from Iris, but I know that there are some other data, like I believe the Arizona people were saying in some hospitals and some dams.
That's going to be not useful for this purpose. So that would be strong motion data, but we're after nearby, because that'll be distant events, and we're going to be Q dominated by those. So we have to get some nearby recordings where, you know, the Nyquist is at least 50 hertz, maybe 100 hertz would be nice. But we'll double check with them. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Directivity. Yes.
What about the high frequency rock issues?
Yes, so high frequency rock issue is issues. I'm just going to write it here anyway, okay, and we'll fix it. This is the longer term effort needed okay. What do we want? I need a nice way to say, get the models. Thank you. That's a. Okay. Thank you, Yusef. Okay, anything else? We are at directivity, so the other models that are working on will be presented in March, but the implementation of the Shaw and Baker model was one question: how do we do it? And if I summarize this right, Jack, right now your current model shows no increase in sigma, but a change in the medians in the order of sort of 0.15 to 0.3 type of range. That we could blur into the sigmas if we wanted to bring something along. The models and methods are being further evaluated to see why you didn't get the expected sigma increase, and not really ready in its current form. Is that a fair statement?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. All right, as well, we want to check with Paul Spudich on his evaluation of the peer working group directivity methods and models. He gave us a review a year ago, and does he still stick with that evaluation of the different approaches? Oh, anything else on directivity? Okay, rupture dynamics. So there's a lot here and a whole lot of promise. So I'm going to try to figure out how we can prioritize the best use of this for our project, fitting into a broader evaluation that Julian would be using. So velocity models, the comment was, really look at the contrast across the fault. We could use 1D models, and that this could have a significant effect. It is an issue that this is not a case that sort of we got good, let's say, nice results from the valid verification, and we have to get the models producing consistent results to be used. The dip of the splay fault, I think, consider using a range of dips, and that was successful, I believe, in the validate verification, so we can do that. We're really looking at uses of one, constraining kinematic source inputs, as well as trying to get the ground motions out, and that we could also use it for source characterization in terms of relative rates of splay fault ruptures, and that the dynamic ruptures could put limits on some of the complexer splay fault scenarios that might not be really possible or under the regional stress field. Anything else? Other than dynamic, rupture dynamics can do it all if we can just get there. Okay. Fragile geologic features, last part. So we have already collected the samples at Double Rock East. We wanted to see the fragility estimates before we push forward, but numbers of half a G to 1 G give us something that's in a range that is potentially useful, but really here, if we follow the dating, and if it's greater than 1,000 years that it's been in the fragile position, it could provide us some constraints. If it's in the range of a few hundred years, then we would say this is likely to be not helpful, but this is straightforward as the samples have been taken. If we're getting old enough ages, then we would be pushing to develop better fragility models to work with. Mark, did you have a comment?
Yeah, that's consistent with what I'm thinking. But a related question on fragile geologic features is you said that at the Palos Verdes site, the area had already been looked at and no fragile geologic features found. Just interested in following up on that as to who did that and what.
I don't remember who checked that out.
This is Carla D'Alessandro. We received some communication from the TI team lead and the project manager
Scott,
of the Palo Verde seismic source characterization. So they had some discussion on their workshop 1, and I think at workshop 2 as well. We had received the slides for workshop 1, and they have been made available to the project. So they were discussing. There was a group looking at that. I can't remember the name.
But I think if you want to follow up, it's Scott Lindahl, right, is leading that. Is that correct?
Yes, Scott
right.
and Ross Hartley.
And Ross.
So they would be the persons to contact.
Okay.
Yeah, it would just be worthwhile having a relook at that, since there's people who think in terms of the precarious rocks, but there's also other features that are worth looking at as by way of a follow-up, so I'll follow up on that.
Okay. All right, then my broad summary of what we've been doing and where we're going. Over the last 2 days, I'm not going to tell you all the same summary slides you saw yesterday and the day before, but in our data needs that we identified in workshop 1, we've got some of them done, but some aren't completed yet. We also had some new things that were identified in the last couple days that we have to address. These all have to be completed by February 2013 for us to use them in this project. If it's not done, then we're going to have to capture that value or that uncertainty and broaden it out around that parameter. Key features or things that we're talking about here of changes or updates is replacing in the median GMPEs, replacing BINDI 2011 with BINDI 2013, and that looks to be a better behaved model, and adding a modified version of ZAL that brings in ZAL's magnitude scaling, assuming John agrees with that and we're capturing it properly. We will be doing additional finite fault simulation scenarios. So we were showing you the first set, but we are scheduled to run 2 more passes through that, looking at just the large magnitude scaling. So we haven't run those cases yet, but up to 7 to 8. And then complex and splay ruptures that we talked about. I think the hanging wall sets look pretty complete. I don't see us doing additional ones there. Sigma models are being developed, so we need to get them done and document them, both the single station Sigma and the single path Sigma models. So Linda is not here, right? So we can assign that to her as she's left the room. Yes. So let me go through the last pieces and then we'll see if we've missed anything. Our epistemic model, this is the exploration using the visualization tool. So we need to really work with Nico to see if we can make this stuff work and that we can all explain it. So my goal is that by the time we're done with this in March, everyone in the room will be able to explain what those plots look like and how they're derived. I think this is still a real valuable tool, but it's sort of in the exploratory phase for us. Arizona data, so we've got to get the kappas done and the path effects and the evaluation of that after we've brought back the site characterizations. And moving forward with that, directivity, probably we'll be folding that into Sigma as a practical way to move forward in a quick way. But with the CY13 model, it's there directly, and so we can do some comparisons with a model that has it embedded in the GMPE versus trying to make a Sigma adjustment to our models. So March 2014 workshop, what's going to be there? It's workshop 3 is listed as a evaluation and feedback workshop, but we're going to begin with a repeat of some of the workshop 2 elements because, as you see, we're getting the data done and additional candidate models presented. So we'll have a repeat of this sort of proponent model phase, including the broad group of the resource and proponent experts that were here today to be sure that we are properly representing these new models and interrogating them. And then we'll follow up. So this may be 1 day here or 1.5 days, depending how we do it, following up with the preliminary evaluations by the TI team of the logic trees and then critical evaluations from the PPRTP and our research and proponent experts on this evaluation at that time.
Norm, would you like to disclose what is the target date for the workshop?
I would, but I don't even know what it is. I'm sure I have it in my calendar, but not in my head. So
it is March 10th through the 12th in the Bay Area, but the exact location to be further confirmed. So make yourself available and free up your calendar.
With all of you,
beforehand,
PPRP and key people before, so you should have that date in there. Anything else?